A BB for Hody and straight black pride, brothers and sisters. This is your brother DC Radical One with episode 2 of Ask DC. And of course, this is our newest segment here on the YouTube channel. And this question comes to us from Black Magus on Instagram. And he asks, when did the fear of standing up leave you? And what was the catalyst? And can that still be implemented in those who are still afraid today? And this is a very interesting question in that it presupposes one thing. And that presupposition is that fear was ever there. And here's the reality. It's going to sound weird, but it is true. I was too young and too naive to actually have a fear of standing up. And then, of course, I grew up in a completely different environment. And because I grew up in a completely different environment at a completely different time, it just, like, my outlook on the world and what shaped me is completely different from many people today. So, in order for me to answer this question, I kind of have to go into some personal history. All right? So, understand, I grew up in and around Washington, D.C. This man on the screen was the mayor when I was a boy. So that Washington, D.C. was approximately 80 to 85% black. The adjoining PG County was over 60% black. There was a pride in being black, even amongst people that many people nowadays would consider coons, like church people and, like that. There was still a pride in being black. So the environment was different. I believe that some of the residual of the revolutionary times of the 60s and 70s was still somewhat in the atmosphere in the 80s. And then there was a revival of this type of spirit, although manifested in a different way, in the 80s and 90s. So coming up in that environment, where, and for like looking at Washington D.C. for example, you had a black mayor, black police chief, black fire chief. You had many people working in city government and federal government, black people. And so it was a time where black people were making strides economically. You had black businesses in Washington D.C. Mayor Marion Barry was responsible for a lot of that, with different set aside programs and whatnot. And so, even though in the midst of what would come a devastating crime wave, the crack epidemic and all that, even in the midst of that, there was a pride in being black. So this is the environment that I grew up in. So a fear, and then also not really being around Europeans, there was no fear of Europeans like that. And in fact, this is going to sound weird. We very much thought when we were young that Europeans were, at least from a physical standpoint, like if you have to fight some Europeans, right? We thought we were their superior. That's how we thought. So when you say a fear of standing up, brother, I was too young and naive to have that thought. Um, when I first got knowledge. Now understand, I first got knowledge as a teenager. I was 16. So the idea of fearing just didn't occur to me. Like, I didn't even know at the time what I was signing up for. The fear I had, to be honest, was more of a fear of disappointing my peers and colleagues and the people who were older than me, who were in the knowledge, when I began to attend events, I began to, be part of study groups and things like that. The fear was more a fear of not living up to the standards of whatever group of people I was with. So when I began attending the Nation of Islam Mosque, for example, the fear was the fear of not being good enough to walk amongst those people. That was the fear. So it was a different type of fear. It was a fear of not fitting in, a fear of not meeting standards, fear of not being good enough. That was the fear. And so, like, to give you an example of the types of things that's going on in Washington, D.C., like one of the institutions we had this place. This was Pyramid Bookstore, the House of Knowledge on Georgia Avenue. That area of Georgia Avenue. So not only did you have a majority black city, but you had a section near Howard University. Running up and down Georgia Avenue, where Howard University is. You had a litany of not only black businesses, but conscious, for lack of a better word, black businesses. That the House of Knowledge had like 5 or 6 stores, and all of them were black owned. You had Nation of Islam stores. You had I'm trying to remember everything. Actually, Nation of Islam had a store at the top, and then they had a bakery on the bottom, and then you had another bookstore. Well, no, the Pyramid Books was at the top. Then Nation of Islam had their tape store, I think, underneath that, and then there was a Nation of Islam bakery at the bottom. Then there was a bookstore next to this store. And so this was the place to go. This is where you went to interact with people. This was the environment. And I'm just trying to show that was the environment. This is also at a time when people like Dr. John Henry Clark was alive. Dr. Yusuf Ben Yakinen was alive. Dr. Asa Hilliard was alive. Of course, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing was still alive. Dale Jones. So there was a litany of scholars. There was a mass of organizations. It was just a completely different environment, right? So from that perspective, I cannot say that in essence, what molded me and what shaped me can be implemented today because we're in a different environment. We're here, when I first got knowledge, or first being to study in the 80s, which all of that began with autobiography of Malcolm X. This was before the Malcolm X movie even came on. That environment helped mold who I am. So I would say that I was too young and too naive to have a fear of a fear. Like, I was young enough, I had nothing to lose. I didn't have a fear. I didn't have a job, right? But I did have a summer job eventually, but you understand what I'm saying. I'm not paying bills. I'm not living on my own. None of these things. So when you're that young and you're that naive and you feel invincible, there's nothing for you to really fear in the sense of the standing up part, to go, back to the question. We would go back to the question. So I never had a fear of standing up. And the catalyst of that was the environment and my youth. Now, the second part of the question is, and can it still be implemented in those who are still afraid? I would say that in order for, or what people can learn from, or what people can take, or what people can replicate from my particular circumstance, is you can focus on the youth. Because again, I was the youth. It's a long time ago. I was the youth. I was, like I said, the first spark from that autobiography of Malcolm X was 16. Now, my questioning began before that. And finding a youth that's already questioning, that may be a whole different discussion. But my questioning began when I was reading. Interestingly enough, I used to read the Bible. My mother used to take me to church. I used to read the Bible. I was reading the Bible. There were sections that I couldn't make heads or tails of. I would ask people questions and no one seemed to know the answer. And the parts of the Bible that the preacher was focusing on were not the interesting parts of the Bible to me. And so that was the initial spark. Now, that happened even before I was a teenager, maybe 12 years old. So to answer your question, what could be implemented from my journey? The only thing that could be implemented and replicated from my journey, because it started so long ago, in a different environment, in a different time, different space, is to find youth who are already questioning what's going on, which normally, just as a part of youth, is usually really a large percentage of youth. And to gather those type of youth and specifically to target those who have leadership qualities, those who in a way, weirdly enough, those who are the most rebellious to authority, those who have the most charisma and have the capacity to have others follow them. Take those youth when you can find them and attempt to teach them and attempt to train them and have them bring their friends and colleagues and, maybe brothers and sisters, whoever, along with them to learn and train under you. That is the only lesson that I can say to from my life's journey. As far as if someone is afraid to stand up, what would I recommend? I just say you have to weigh in the balance what's important to you. Is going along and to get along important? I mean, we all have to survive. Let's be honest. We all have to survive. We all have to have some form of income. We all have to have a way to make a living. Depending on where you are in your life journey, some people have more to lose than others. So there's no one size fits all template for that. You just have to decide, what is most important to you. Is saving your race important? Or are you one of those people that's you're just gonna try to go along, get along, keep your head down and hope nothing happens? The reality of the situation is we're all in danger as Black people. All Black people are in danger as long as Black people collectively are powerless. But I believe it's Huey P. Newton, and I'm a paraphrase. I believe he said that Um, the revolution belongs in the hands of the young. And so focusing on the youth, getting the knowledge to your youth, like I said, finding those special youth that have leadership qualities. Ultimately, if we want people who are fearless, even if that fearlessness is due to naivete, like it wasn't in my case, we want youth that have nothing to lose. But we also, if we're going to do that, to be honest, so that they don't suffer and become disillusioned, we also have to have the ability to teach them skills that will make them self-sufficient, right? So we have to have programs for them to get into the trades, HVAC, plumbing, electricity, things of that nature, automotive, so that if we have a young man and he's willing to stand up, he's willing to face the criticisms, he's willing to face the possible repercussions, because the more powerful you are, the more people you can organize, the more the higher up the food chain your enemies become. And one of the ways that they attack, of course, is economically. So if we're going to do that, we have to give these youth the skills that they need to economically survive and thrive outside of the corporate structure. We also will have to be teaching and training them to be able to defend themselves physically, and develop those skill sets, because it's possible if and we've seen this from history, that if such a group is can't be attacked economically, then the next step is for them to be attacked physically. I mean, this is all the realities of the situation. And I would say when you teach youth, you just tell them, hey, this is what's happened in the past. This is what's possible. Because really, a lot of times when you're young, you just like, all right, bring it on. So, brother, to answer your question, I was just too young and too naive. You can say too young and dumb to even have a fear, because I didn't even understand the possible repercussions. Because even though I knew Malcolm X had been assassinated, I knew Martin Luther King had been assassinated, I had no fear of that, because I didn't, the thought of ever becoming relevant enough for something like that to happen, that wasn't even a possibility. I was just trying to learn. This was interesting. And it was giving me answers to things that no one else had answers to. And so, like I said, the only way the life lessons, the most pertinent life lessons or lessons from my life that I would say is to try to get the message and try to organize the youth, the younger the better, and so that fear doesn't even get implemented, and that curiosity and that natural genius, that natural intelligence, that natural bravery, all those things are accentuated because of the youth of the people. So thanks again to Black Maggots for that, Black Maggots on Instagram for that question. And again, this has been Ask DC. So don't forget, brothers and sisters, to like, share, and subscribe. Please spread the message and let people know. For those of you who purchased the live stream, I thank you all for your support. Those who donate via the Cashapp, I thank you all for your support. And again, you can ask me questions if you would like for me to make a video of your question. You can ask me questions on Instagram. I'm at Instagram at dc.radical. the numeral 1. That's DC.Radical, the numeral 1. So, with that, brothers and sisters, I thank you all for listening. I thank you all for subscribing. I thank you all for supporting. And I thank you all for your questions. This has been episode 2 of Ask DC. With that, I say Abibi Fahodie and straight black pride. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also follow us on our other social media platforms. On Instagram, we're at DC.Radical1. On Twitter, we're at DC_Radical_ONE. And the Cash App is $DC Radical, the numeral 1. Thank you again.